tiny SUV that can easily fit in the smallest parking spot on the planet, yet it can climb rocky terrain that might humble a Land Rover. It's small, it's underpowered, it's slow, yet people love this thing unconditionally, completely, fiercely, maybe even a little bit irrationally. This is the Suzuki Jimny. One look at this adorable machine and you might be inclined to dismiss it as a toy or something that's only liked for its aesthetic charm. It is cute, right? But one look underneath the Jimny and you'll quickly realize that it's much more than that. Since the first generation in 1970, the Jimny has always been a capable 4x4. This right here is a third generation Japanese market Jimny that I just imported from Japan. Now we'll talk about my Jimny in great detail in just a bit, but first I think we need to take an off-road drive down Suzuki's memory lane. To understand where this all started, you've got to go back to late 1960s Japan and a tiny company with huge ambitions. And no, the story doesn't actually start with Suzuki. Back in the 50s and 60s, a small Japanese car company called Hope Motor Company built an array of small, lightweight vehicles. But they weren't ever able to fully compete with larger automakers. The company was running into financial trouble, and they made one last-ditch effort to save the company in 1967 with a four-wheel drive, body-on-frame vehicle called the Hope Star ON360. This was an inexpensive K-Class 4x4 designed for Japan's rural terrain. Sounds like a recipe for success, right? Well, not quite. Cheap construction and build quality issues meant that reviews were not very positive. Very few were built, and Hope went bankrupt. This is where Suzuki stepped in. They snapped up the design for the ON360 for 12 million yen, made a whole host of changes to ready it for production. A two-stroke air-cooled 359cc engine was dropped in, and the top speed was a staggering 47 miles per hour. This was released to the public in 1970 as the LJ10.
Suzuki Jimny 新発売 It's Suzuki!
Despite being underpowered enough to be overtaken by a kid on a bicycle, the LJ10 found a devoted audience among farmers, people who lived in rural areas, and anyone who wanted to blaze their own trail. Suzuki continuously refined the LJ through the 70s, upgrading to four-stroke engines, offering more power, adding a hardtop version, revising the styling, and offering longer wheelbase variants. With almost no other four-wheel drive competition, especially in a vehicle this small, Suzuki had a hit on their hands. It was cheap, simple, and almost indestructible, a combination that would define the Jimny formula well into the future.
悪路突破の四輪駆動鈴木ジムニーさらにたくましくなりました。
The second generation came in 1981. Underneath, the chassis remained mostly the same, with slightly improved suspension. But comfort was improved to make the Jimny more city-friendly, and styling was revised to infuse it with more fun and fashion.
Suzuki New Jimny Suzuki Jimny
This generation Jimny sold all over the world with a multitude of names, all the way until 2006 in some markets. And if you're in North America, this generation Jimny may be the vehicle you remember. It came to the US in '85 as the Samurai.
One of the world's most demanding test tracks, and the 1987 Suzuki Samurai 4x4. It's taking the straightaway test.
It really goes straight.
Maneuvering into the uphill test, the downhill test. Now the all-important brake test.
Let's break for lunch.
The Samurai sold over 150,000 units in the first 3 years thanks to its bargain price of about $6,200 and commercials that touted just how fun the Samurai could be. By '87, over 1 million had been sold worldwide. The Samurai became a favorite, outselling the Jeep Wrangler 2-to-1 in 1987. Despite its compact size, it was a genuine four-wheel drive vehicle with a transfer case, selectable four-wheel drive, and low range, and its light weight made it nimble off-road and less prone to bogging down in soft terrain than some of its heavier competitors. The tagline, "Never a dull moment," was about to get very real for Suzuki. Enter the non-profit testing group Consumer Reports. In 1988, a staff member had discovered the potential for the Samurai to tip in certain situations due to its narrow track and tall stature. The Samurai refused to tip on Consumer Reports' standard course, and their own test drivers rated it no more prone to rolling than comparable vehicles. So they decided to modify the course to induce a tip, and after many attempts, they finally got it up on 2 wheels. They then published an article stating that it easily rolls over in turns, and held a press conference calling the car dangerous. Sales immediately tanked. The Samurai's reputation was done for. In '96, Suzuki filed a $60 million lawsuit against Consumer Reports, and it became clear that Consumer Reports had modified their testing procedure specifically to get the Samurai to roll. But the case eventually settled in 2010 with no admission of wrongdoing from either side. But given all that, we can't just assume that the Samurai was safe. Suzuki's own internal 1985 memo acknowledged it is imperative that we develop a crisis plan that will primarily deal with the roll factor. Suzuki's own expert witnesses later testified that the company was aware of 213 deaths and 8,200 injuries involving Samurai rollovers. In March '89, the American Journal of Public Health published a peer-reviewed study investigating the risk of fatal rollovers in utility vehicles. They did determine that the rollover risk of a Samurai was significantly higher than a passenger car and higher than many SUVs. But the Jeep CJ5, CJ7, Ford Bronco, and Ford Bronco 2 all had a much higher relative risk of a fatal rollover crash. And then fast forward to June 2005, NHTSA issued a technical report that studied the static stability factor of vehicles. The Samurai was much worse than passenger cars, unsurprisingly, and slightly worse than most SUVs, but certainly not the worst. So ultimately, yes, the Samurai does have a high rollover risk compared to a passenger car, but there are several other more popular vehicles that are worse, but they were never called out on it. And maybe if Consumer Reports had been more consistent and honest with their testing, Suzuki might still offer cars for sale here in the US today. After 2 generations that span nearly 3 decades, a much more modern Jimny was introduced by Suzuki in 1998. Mine is a '99 and it just arrived from Japan. This Generation Jimny had a much more urbane design, aiming to attract a wider range of buyers. The exterior had softer edges, typical of the era, a more refined interior, and some even had push-button 4-wheel drive. Beneath the surface, however, the Jimny retained everything that made it such a capable 4x4. Ladder frame chassis, solid front and rear axles, part-time 4-wheel drive with low range. The Jimny remained a proper off-roader at a time when SUVs were far more popular in mall parking lots than on dirt roads. So mine is the standard Jimny that fits Japan's K-car class dimensions with a 658cc turbocharged engine, but a Jimny Wide, also known as the Jimny Sierra, was available, with fender flares, larger bumpers, and a 1.3-liter engine. It took 14 long years, but the 3rd generation finally got a facelift in 2012. And this 3rd gen ran for an astonishing 20 years, accumulating fans across every continent and every demographic. Unveiled at the 2018 Tokyo Motor Show, the 4th generation Jimny arrived with an overwhelmingly positive reaction. Once again, it was downright adorable and retained the 4x4 capabilities that made the Jimny what it was for decades. Car journalists who had spent years demanding more power, more technology, and more sophistication were suddenly queuing up to praise something with just 101 horsepower. It was a reminder that a supremely capable vehicle could still be small and practical. Suzuki could not keep up with demand. A 5-door version was introduced with waiting lists extending as long as 3 years. All right, let's get back to my 3rd generation Jimny right here. Let's do a walk around of the exterior. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about is size. This is significantly smaller than a Jeep Wrangler. It is very tiny, but oh so adorable. Down here, it kind of looks like there might be a skid plate, but I do not have one on this vehicle. That's something I'm gonna wanna add at some point. It's got some fog lights, and check this out right there. We've got a hood scoop because this thing is turbocharged and intercooled. We'll talk about that in a second. Very useful side mirror right here, although I do need to repaint mine. So I have a K-car version of the 3rd generation Jimny, and that means that it meets Japanese domestic market K-car rules that specifies that the vehicle has to be narrower and shorter, has smaller displacement, that kind of thing. So it's quite a bit narrower than the Jimny Wide or the Jimny Sierra. It's got smaller bumpers than the Jimny Wide, also doesn't have the wider wheel arches. And aside from being less powerful, it's every bit as capable. Well, maybe not with these tires. I definitely don't have the best tires for off-roading. All right, moving on to the side, you have a very nice boxy shape, very utilitarian to maximize interior space with extremely small exterior dimensions. I love this little angle right here, that's pretty neat. Check this out right here. Look at this badge we have going on here. With 2 dolphins, it says, "Suzuki, we believe that this fortune should be shared with all the peoples of the world." Yeah, I do too. Now you look down here and yeah, it's not the highest ground clearance I've ever seen on a vehicle, but it's quite high for a vehicle this small. Now moving on to the back, you can really see how narrow this thing is, and check out this amazing wheel cover. I love it. But yeah, huge fan of this design. All right, let's take a look at the interior. All right, so first impressions of this 3rd generation Jimny's interior is that it looks very Spartan, at least by today's standards. But you gotta remember, back in the day, the 2nd generation went on for years and years with an interior that was even more basic than this. So this was a big step up for the late 90s. But to be honest, this type of interior is my absolute favorite. Nothing's complicated, everything is physical controls, very easy to use. Not a whole lot going on in here. I do find it kind of funny that the steering wheel does not have a Suzuki logo on it, just this big sort of textured circle. So in terms of functionality, apparently some 3rd gens have push button controls to activate 4-wheel drive, but mine has the mechanical lever down here. Right in front of that is the shifter for the 5-speed manual transmission. It's got this shifter boot that kind of looks like the end of a toilet plunger. Not much in terms of storage, a little pocket up here in the front, one down here by the seats. There are actually 2 cup holders. You got these side pockets with this sort of dangling strap. I think over the years, maybe it kind of loosened up, but I think this was supposed to hold your cargo in the door pocket, but right now it just kind of dangles. Now for such a basic entry-level vehicle, we have fog lights, we've got power windows, we've got power mirrors, air conditioning, everything you could ask for. A little bit disappointing, no oh shit handle here on the right-hand side. And check out the very festive fabric on these seats. It looks amazing. Seems like by the late 90s here in the United States, fun fabrics were kind of falling out of favor, but they were still kind of a thing there in Japan. That fun fabric continues on to the door panels and the rear seats. So in terms of space for me, once again, this is a very narrow vehicle, so not a lot of space from side to side. And this seat is all the way back, but I still fit in here rather well. I'm 6'3". I got tons of headroom. Maybe not a whole lot of legroom, but it's fine. I would probably have to move my seat up a little bit to have anybody sit behind me though. So there you have it. Pretty basic up here in the front, but it was definitely a lot more luxurious than the 2nd generation. All right, let's check out the back seat. Not a whole lot of space back there, but I think I can make it work. All right, so here in the back seat, I feel a little bit more like cargo than an actual passenger, but we do have seats with festive fabric. If I was a little bit shorter, I think I'd be maybe somewhat comfortable back here, but it's a little tight for my legs, but tons of headroom actually. So if you had to carry 1 extra person back here, it'd probably be okay, or a couple kids, but it's not a place you really want to spend a ton of your time. But you know, the very boxy upright shape of this vehicle means that I have plenty of space for my noggin. So yeah, the compactness of this vehicle is extremely charming, but I'd say maybe comfort wasn't exactly the #1 objective. All right, let's check out the cargo area. We have just enough space to fit me. I don't know if I could get this shut, but it gives you a sense of how much space is in here. But if we want to fold these seats down, we'll have a whole lot more room. First, you got to take off the headrests, then lift these forward. Then you can push these down. If you're not carrying passengers, you can fit a ton of stuff in here. I actually had 8 tires fit back here, which I was very surprised by, but it worked. This is also pretty well suited to cargo. We've got a couple tie-down hooks over here on the sides. We have a little bit more space down here. What's in here? A nook for random things. Got that on the other side as well. But yeah, I'd say this space rivals some small SUVs that are sold today. Now under the hood of this K-car version is Suzuki's turbocharged and intercooled 658cc inline 3-cylinder making 63 horsepower and 78 pound-feet of torque. Now that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but you gotta keep in mind this thing only weighs 2,100 pounds. Okay, we're gonna pull onto this main highway. Acceleration is actually not too terrible when you're just getting up to like 30 miles per hour. Getting up to 60, it's a little bit more leisurely, about 14.7 seconds. It's not quick, but it's actually not nearly as slow as I thought it was going to be. There is actually a fair amount of low end torque here, so if you're just accelerating onto a street or onto the freeway, it's actually not too bad. I drove the freeway to get over here, and this thing can easily do 65 miles per hour, provided there's no like incredibly steep hill. So the tall stature of this thing combined with the short wheelbase and the relatively high ground clearance means that the ride quality on tarmac sort of oscillates between, I don't know, agricultural equipment and a small boat on choppy seas. But one huge thing that I love about this vehicle is that it's so tiny. It doesn't feel like it's lumbering down the road like a big truck. It's easy to fit in small spaces. On a narrow road like this, it doesn't feel like I'm taking up the entire width of the road. And that is really useful when you're going off-road and you're trying to go down some really narrow trails. And the steering in here is recirculating ball. It's kind of old school. But while the steering feels pretty imprecise on the tarmac, it's actually great off-road. And it's in the dirt where the Jimny shines without question. With some off-road vehicles, you might just be tempted to beat the scenery into submission, but this Jimny, you know, it's kind of pint-sized. And with this thing, you're almost sort of skipping over the top of all the obstacles. It's kind of like a little mountain goat. You can get to places in this thing that you definitely could not get to with a much larger vehicle. Over 3 million Jimnys have been sold in its 50+ years of existence. The Jimny proved that you didn't need an expensive or massive truck to go to massive places. All you needed was a solid chassis, low range, and maybe a slight disregard for your own comfort. In an era of automotive gigantism where trucks keep getting larger and luxury SUVs and crossovers are littering our roads, the Suzuki Jimny's continued cheerful existence is now maybe more important than ever. A reminder that small can be better. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. If you'd like to help support the show, please buy a Hello Road t-shirt or hat at helloroad.tv/shop. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll see you soon.